Throughout history, kings have ruled with power, ambition, and divine authority. Yet not all rulers were blessed. Some were marked by curses, madness, betrayal, and tragic downfall that haunted both themselves and their kingdoms. Tonight, we unveil the top 3 cursed kings in royal history. Now, let us begin. Number 3. Charles VI of France, the Mad King. Let us travel back to the late Middle Ages, to a time when France was one of the greatest kingdoms in Europe, but also one of the most troubled. This is the tale of Charles VI, a king remembered not for glory, nor for wisdom, but for madness. His reign has come down through history as cursed, a dark chapter in the story of France. Charles VI was born in the year 1368, the son of Charles V, who was known as Charles the Wise. His father had restored the French crown after disastrous defeats in the early stages of the 100 Years' War. Under Charles V, France regained land, strengthened its administration, and seemed ready for greatness once again. The young prince was raised in this atmosphere of renewal and hope. When Charles V died in 1380, the throne passed to his son, who was only 11 years old. The boy was crowned at Reims Cathedral, the sacred site of French coronations, where oil believed to be sent from heaven was placed upon his brow. The people saw in him the promise of a bright future, a young, handsome king who might bring peace to a nation weary of war. But from the beginning, shadows gathered. Because Charles was too young to rule, the kingdom fell under the control of his uncles. They were greedy men, hungry for power and wealth. They taxed the people heavily and drained the treasury, undoing much of the stability Charles's father had built. For the first years of his reign, France was ruled by corruption, faction, and discontent. When Charles came of age, he at first seemed determined to change this. He dismissed his uncles and surrounded himself with young advisors known as the marmosets, who tried to restore order and fairness. For a brief time, the kingdom breathed easier. People hoped their king would live up to his father's example. But fate had other plans that would soon reveal the terrible curse that lay upon Charles. In the summer of 1392, the court travelled through the forest near Le Mans. Charles, dressed in shining armor, rode at the head of his knights. The day was hot, the sun blazing, the horses restless. Suddenly, a madman rushed forward from the trees, seizing the bridle of the king's horse. He cried out, "Ride no further, noble king, for you are betrayed." The guards seized the man, but the words struck deep into Charles's mind. His face went pale, his eyes vacant. Moments later, in a frenzy, he drew his sword and slashed at those around him. The King of France turned upon his own men like a wild beast. He cut down several of his loyal companions before he was restrained. When the fit passed, Charles seemed unaware of what he had done. He wept, horrified by the blood on his hands. But the damage was done. France had seen its monarch lose control, and from that moment, madness became his constant shadow. Over the years, Charles's insanity returned again and again, each episode lasting longer, each more destructive. Sometimes he failed to recognize his own family. He would insist he was not the king at all, but a simple peasant named George. At other times, he would run screaming through his palace halls, convinced enemies lurked in every shadow. The most infamous of his delusions was the belief that his body was made of glass. Terrified of shattering, he wrapped himself in iron rods sewn into his clothes and refused to let anyone touch him. Imagine the scene. The most powerful man in France, a king anointed by God, trembling at the thought of breaking like a fragile goblet. Courtiers whispered in fear. Servants crept silently through the corridors of his palaces, afraid that the slightest noise might set him off. His queen, Isabeau of Bavaria, tried to hold the court together, but rumors swirled that she betrayed him with powerful nobles. The royal family was poisoned by scandal, suspicion, and disgrace. While the king raved in madness, France itself fell into chaos. His uncles and cousins fought bitterly for power. Two great factions arose: the Armagnacs, loyal to the king's brother, and the Burgundians, led by the Duke of Burgundy. Their rivalry plunged the kingdom into civil war. Blood ran in the streets of Paris. Assassinations and massacres became common. Instead of uniting against England, which pressed its advantage in the 100 Years' War, France tore itself apart. The English could not have asked for a better gift. While France was weakened by internal strife, England under Henry V struck with deadly force. At the Battle of Agincourt in 1415, French knights were slaughtered in the mud, their chivalry no match for English longbows. The loss stunned France. Its army shattered, its nobility humiliated, its king lost in madness. In 1420, the disaster was complete. Charles, in no condition to rule, was forced into the Treaty of Troyes. This agreement recognized Henry V of England as the heir to the French throne, disinheriting Charles's own son. For the first time in centuries, the future of France itself was signed away to a foreign power. Many called it the lowest point in French history. And still, Charles lived on, trapped in his curse. He endured fits of madness that left him raving, filthy, and lost. There were moments of lucidity when he wept for what had become of his kingdom, but they were rare and fleeting. When he finally died in 1422, he left behind a shattered country, racked by war and divided by hatred. Yet from this darkness, a flicker of hope would later emerge. His son, Charles VII, disinherited and mocked, would one day reclaim the crown with the help of a young peasant girl named Joan of Arc. But that is another story. For Charles VI, his legacy was one of madness, betrayal, and ruin. The people of his time called him Charles the Mad. History remembers him as a man cursed from the start. His reign showed how the fragility of one ruler could drag down an entire kingdom. Madness was his curse, and through him, France itself was cursed. Number 2. Richard III of England, the Doomed Usurper. Now we cross the Channel, leaving the troubled kingdoms of France behind to step into the storm of English history. It is the 15th century, a time of roses, but not roses of love, roses of war. Red for Lancaster, white for York. Two rival houses, locked in a deadly struggle for the throne. And in the middle of this storm stood a king whose very name has become a shadow. His story is one of ambition, betrayal, and a curse that lingered even beyond death. He was Richard III of England, remembered as the Doomed Usurper. Richard was born in October 1452, the youngest son of Richard, Duke of York, a powerful nobleman with a claim to the throne. From the beginning, Richard's childhood was shaped by violence. The Wars of the Roses had already begun, and his family lived in constant danger. When Richard was only 8, his father was killed in battle, his head set on a pike above the gates of York as a warning. Imagine the terror of that child, growing up in a world where power meant survival, and survival demanded ruthlessness. But Richard was not weak. He grew into a hardened soldier, small in stature but fierce in will. Loyal to his elder brother Edward, Richard followed him into battle again and again. When Edward seized the crown as Edward IV, Richard was rewarded with lands, titles, and command in the north of England. To the people of Yorkshire, Richard was seen as a just and energetic lord, defending them against Scottish raids. For a time, he was admired, even loved. Yet ambition was always there, waiting. When Edward IV died suddenly in 1483, the crown was meant to pass to his 12-year-old son, Edward V. Richard was named Lord Protector, entrusted to safeguard the boy until he came of age. But what happened next has haunted England ever since. Richard declared that his brother's marriage to Elizabeth Woodville had been invalid, making her children illegitimate. By this claim, the boy King Edward and his younger brother Richard lost their right to inherit. In a stunning turn, Richard himself was crowned king. The young princes were placed in the Tower of London, supposedly for their protection. But soon after, they vanished. The fate of the princes in the Tower remains one of the greatest mysteries of history. Some believe Richard ordered their murder, smothered quietly at night and buried in secret. Others argue that later enemies, eager to blacken his name, spread lies. But to the people of England, the whispers were enough. Their king was stained with suspicion of child murder. He was cursed by blood guilt, and the curse only deepened. Richard's reign lasted barely 2 years, yet those years were poisoned by rebellion and betrayal. Nobles who once supported him turned away. The people muttered that the king was a usurper. Even nature seemed to turn against him. crops failed, storms struck, and superstition grew. Shakespeare, writing more than a century later, captured the dark mood of Richard's reign in lines that still echo, "Now is the winter of our discontent." But Richard was not a coward. He was a warrior king, determined to defend his crown with his life. That moment came in August 1485, at the Battle of Bosworth. Facing the army of Henry Tudor, Richard chose not to hide behind walls or retreat to safety. Instead, he led a desperate cavalry charge, determined to cut down Henry himself and end the rebellion in one stroke. Eyewitnesses say Richard fought with the fury of a lion. He slew enemy knights, cut through Henry's guard, and came within arm's length of his rival. But betrayal struck at the worst moment. Men who had sworn loyalty to Richard turned their coats on the battlefield, abandoning him. Surrounded, Richard was cut down in the mud. His final cry, "Treason! Treason!" echoed as his crown was snatched from a thorn bush and placed upon Henry's head. Henry became Henry VII, founder of the Tudor dynasty, while Richard's body was left broken. What followed was humiliation. Richard's naked corpse was thrown across a horse, paraded through the streets of Leicester for all to mock. He was buried hastily, without honor, in a humble grave. For centuries, his body was lost, his memory cursed. Shakespeare would later portray him as a monster deformed in body, twisted in soul, crying out for a horse as he lost his kingdom. A horse, my kingdom for a horse, became the line by which he was forever remembered. But the curse did not end there. For over 500 years, Richard's grave remained hidden. Only in 2012, beneath an ordinary parking lot in Leicester, did archaeologists uncover his remains. The skeleton told its own story. Scoliosis had bent his spine, leaving him with one shoulder higher than the other. Wounds from battle scarred his bones, blows that ended his life in brutal fashion. Even in death, his body bore the mark of fate, as though destiny itself had cursed him from birth. Today, historians argue over Richard's true character. Was he a ruthless child killer, cursed by his own cruelty? Or was he a capable ruler smeared by the Tudors, his reputation darkened by propaganda? The truth may never be known, but what cannot be denied is the power of his story. Richard III is remembered as the last king of England to die in battle. He lost not just his crown, but his dynasty, his honor, and his name. His curse was that history itself turned against him. For centuries, his memory was shaped not by what he did, but by how he was portrayed forever a villain, forever a usurper. And so we remember him. Number 2. Richard III of England, the Doomed Usurper. Number 1. Tutankhamun of Egypt, the Boy Pharaoh's eternal curse. Our journey now leaves the castles of Europe behind. We step into a different world, a land of desert sun, timeless stone, and the great river Nile. Egypt, the cradle of kings who were worshipped as gods. Among the many pharaohs whose names echo across the ages, one boy stands out. Not because of his victories, not because of his wisdom, but because of a curse. The boy pharaoh Tutankhamun. Tutankhamun came to the throne around the year 1332 before Christ. He was only 9 years old, a child suddenly burdened with the crown of Egypt. His father had been Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who had defied centuries of tradition by ordering Egypt to worship one god, only the sun disk, Aten. This revolution had thrown Egypt into turmoil. Temples were closed, priests stripped of power, cities abandoned. When Akhenaten died, the empire was fragile and unstable. Into this chaos stepped the boy king. Too young to rule by himself, Tutankhamun was guided by powerful advisors, men determined to restore the old gods and win back the support of the people. The temples of Amun were reopened, priests regained their privileges, and Egypt seemed to breathe again. But for Tutankhamun himself, life was no triumph. It was a struggle marked by illness and weakness. Modern studies of his mummified body reveal a tragic truth. Tutankhamun was frail. He suffered from a cleft palate, scoliosis of the spine, and a clubfoot that forced him to walk with a cane. He endured malaria and bone disease. His body was riddled with pain. He may have been worshipped as a living god, but inside he was a sickly boy. He reigned for less than a decade before dying suddenly around the age of 19. How he died remains a mystery. Some believe an accident. Perhaps a fall from his chariot left him with a fatal leg wound that became infected. Others suspect murder, poisoned by rivals who wanted the throne. The truth lies buried with him. For centuries after his death, Tutankhamun was forgotten. Unlike Ramses or Thutmose, his name was erased from official lists. His tomb was hidden under layers of rock and debris in the Valley of the Kings. Pharaohs who came after him took greater glory, while his memory faded into silence. He was a shadow among giants, and yet, thousands of years later, destiny gave Tutankhamun a second life. In the year 1922, British archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered a tomb that had lain untouched for more than 3 millennia. As he broke the seal and stepped inside by candlelight, his eyes fell on treasures beyond imagination: golden statues, carved chariots, jeweled ornaments, and above all, the glittering mask of Tutankhamun himself. The discovery stunned the world. Newspapers called it the greatest archaeological find of all time. But with the discovery came whispers of a curse. The first victim was Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy patron who had financed the excavation. Only months after the tomb was opened, he died suddenly from a mysterious infection after a mosquito bite turned septic. Newspapers erupted with headlines of the curse of the pharaoh. They reported that when Carnarvon died, all the lights in Cairo went out at once, plunging the city into darkness. His beloved dog, far away in England, howled and collapsed dead at the same moment. Coincidence or curse? Soon others followed. Several people connected to the excavation died unexpectedly: accidents, sudden illnesses, unexplained heart failures. A French Egyptologist fell to his death. An American millionaire who visited the tomb suffered pneumonia and never recovered. A radiologist who examined the mummy died from radiation-related disease. Each death was added to the legend. The world was convinced Tutankhamun's curse was real. Howard Carter himself, the man who first laid eyes on the tomb, lived for another 16 years. But even he could not escape whispers. Rumors claimed he saw strange apparitions, that he heard jackals crying in the desert whenever he entered the tomb. Whether true or not, the legend grew. Scientists later explained the so-called curse with rational answers. They suggested ancient bacteria sealed in the tomb may have infected the explorers. They argued that the deaths were coincidences, magnified by sensational newspapers eager to sell stories. Yet the belief in the curse endures. Even today, tourists shiver when they look into the golden face of Tutankhamun's mask, wondering if unseen forces still linger. And perhaps the greatest curse was not upon those who opened the tomb, but upon Tutankhamun himself. For despite his treasures, despite his fame, he was a boy robbed of life before it began. His body tells the story of suffering: crippled bones, shattered leg, infections, parasites. He was born into luxury, yet cursed with frailty. He was crowned as a god, yet lived as a crippled child. Still, through death, he gained what life denied him: immortality. Today, Tutankhamun is the most famous pharaoh in the world. His face, gleaming in gold, is instantly recognized from Cairo to New York. His treasures have toured the globe, drawing millions of visitors. His name, once erased, is now spoken more than any other king of Egypt. The curse of Tutankhamun is twofold. In life, he was cursed by sickness and an early death. In death, his tomb carried mystery, tragedy, and fear into the modern world. Whether the deaths of Carnarvon and others were coincidence or fate, people believe in the curse. And that belief has kept his story alive for 100 years. So we end here, at the Valley of the Kings. Number 1. Tutankhamun of Egypt, the boy pharaoh whose eternal curse has outlived empires, kings, and centuries. His reign was short, his life was frail, but his name has become immortal.